Right, well, I think we're almost there. Well, thanks everyone. Good morning and welcome. Thank you all for coming in, and for those who've joined us online for joining us for this joint event between DiUS and Unlocking Growth. 10 times the growth through product-led growth. Through customer journey optimization. Welcome this morning. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, I just want to begin by paying our respects to and acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting here on, or that we are meeting on here today. Pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us here today, either online or in person. Welcome everyone. If you haven't met me already, my name is Joe Lucino. I'm the CEO and co-founder, along with Quincy Couttet here in the room of DiUS Computing, 18-year-old tech company. These are our reasonably new offices. Of course, 2 years of COVID, but we weren't using them all that much. So welcome to everybody here who made the journey into the city. I have the privilege of introducing Audrey Melnik from Unlocking Growth, who'll be talking to you today about customer journey optimization, product-led growth, and a whole number of things around how to help grow your business, particularly, I guess, targeted towards founders, product people, or anybody looking to launch a business or launch a new product or platform into market. So lots of great insights I think you'll learn today. We'll have a panel joining us as well. So lots of opportunity to ask questions. Obviously, if you're on Zoom, just use the chat box, I think, Erin, we'll respond best we can. We'll have a panel, so there'll be really good opportunity to talk to people who have applied these techniques and this way of kind of thinking, working to success, for business success. So we hope you enjoy it. Audrey and I met some 21 years ago, I think she said. I said I wasn't going to mention how long, but anyway, a long time. Audrey spent quite a lot of time moving from really development and software engineering for new and emerging kind of product landscapes into founding her own startup, spending some time over in Silicon Valley and the west coast of the US, and then recently came back to Australia. But a lot of what we did today is her own personal experience and lessons learned there, but also obviously working with a number of startups through the Unlocking Growth organization. And so, we hope you'll enjoy it. I don't think there's much else for me to really say here today. For those who haven't met DiUS, we're about 150 people, been around a long time, 18 years, throughout Australia, certainly Melbourne and Sydney are our main offices, but we've helped a lot of companies be startup founders, be those startups who are in the journey and kind of working it out, or companies looking to launch new products. We tend to pull a team together and help them get started, and then often and mostly transition to building their team and getting them started, along that broader journey of getting the startup business moving. So that's us. Audrey, I might hand over to you and come back later on.
Coming out on this cold morning. I'm going to get comfortable and have a seat. Okay. That was true. So my name is Audrey Melnik. I'm one of the co-founder partners of Unlocking Growth. We've been around for 18 months, and a bit about me. As Joe mentioned, we go way back to my software development and business analysis days and the days of object consulting, and stayed in touch. And it's great to reconnect with you, Quincy. And so my story is, after I did all those kinds of things, I decided to go on that startup journey instead of building it for other people. I built it for myself, and started working on a B2C startup in the dating space, and then launched it, and got amazing press and everything, and then went over to the States and started my startup journey in Silicon Valley. And I was there for 8 years, did 3 startups, 1 in the B2B, 1 and 2 in the B2C space. And yeah, when I decided to stop being a startup founder, I thought, I want to go back to my consulting roots, but I really love the startup space. So I wanted to solve some of the problems that I'd experienced as a startup founder and that I saw other startup founders experiencing. And so that was actually the genesis of this customer journey optimization methodology that I want to talk about today. A bit about Unlocking Growth. So Peter Ignatius is my business partner. So he spent 13 years in New York and headed up growth for IBM. So he did like the big end of town, I did the small end of town, and we come together and developed a series of services that we think apply to all ends of the market in Australia. And how many people here know what product-led growth is? Not bad. We had an event last year. There was actually named product-led growth in Sydney, and we asked that the room how many people. Like it was just the people that are unlocking growth. So we're getting there. We're getting better. So product-led growth is a strategy to when you've got a software product, there are a lot of companies that get salespeople to run demos and sell software to the clients and get quotes, etc. And that's the sales-led growth approach. Product-led growth approach is the approach that unicorn companies like Atlassian and Canva and Slack have leveraged to develop to achieve growth from within their products. So the products and so Unlocking Growth, we do growth advisory, product-led growth strategy and execution. Also be talking a bit about the customer journey optimization methodology. We consult around that, and we also do education programs around that in our customer activation rocket ship program. And we also do things like pricing strategies and subscription billing implementation, because that's like very important. It's the engine room in your business as well. Okay, so how many people in this room have at one time or another thought that if you just built that next feature, that would be the magical pill for your customer to convert en masse to your product? And seeing some nods. Yeah. I've been there too. So that's called the next feature fallacy. And if you've ever been a product manager, I think you've probably fallen into this trap at one point or another. Ray is smiling. Okay, so yeah, it's really tempting to focus on your product as the thing that needs to change to achieve more growth. And that's actually the easiest thing, especially if your background is product management. So you often people just default to that position because that's the thing you can control, right? But when you do that, you're actually leaving out the most obvious factor, which is your customer. So think about it. If you focus your attention on changing the perception your customer has of your product, you don't need to change the product. So how do you manage that customer's perception of your product? Product people and engineers usually are pretty logical. So they usually want to remove all emotion from consideration. And they hone in on statistics and really lean on them as the core driver for decisions. But I recently heard from a sales coach expert, and he said that 85% of all sales decisions are emotional. And yet most products don't really put any time into thinking about the emotional state of the customer and how that impacts on your decision to convert. So how can we start thinking about the emotional state of our customers? The very first thing you need to do is to realize that your customers are not a monolith. They have different objectives, different problems they want solved, different ways they would like to solve that problem, and different ways to decide if your product solves their problem for them. And because they're all different, you can't manage their experience with your product in the exact same way. Every part of a customer's journey in your product provides information that helps you to understand who they are, how they want to engage, and what they're feeling about your product. So today I want to discuss some of the key concepts of our customer journey optimization methodology that are covered in that training course. And I'll talk about some of the ways you can tap into a customer experience, their emotions, and where they are at in your product from a journey perspective. So personalization, initial value, onboarding roles, onboarding paths we'll go into here. So Jeff Bezos once described personalization as when you go into a bar and sit down and the bartender puts a whiskey in front of you without having to ask what you want. If you're that person that walks into the bar, you feel seen and heard, which not only helps you gulp down that drink faster, but it tightens your allegiance to that bar. And in product growth, we want our customers to return to our product more often so that it becomes a habit and their reliance on our product is strengthened. So looking back at your own personal experiences with brands and products, have a think about those incredible experiences that have largely been driven by feeling like the experience was built around you. What did they do to make you feel special? How did they show you that they had a handle on your customer journey? So you can incorporate personalization into all areas of your user experience. And so we'll quickly go through some of those elements and what they mean. You need to take the inputs of who the person is, what they've done in your product, and why they haven't yet done as well, or what they haven't yet done as well, and when and how soon they've done things. Content personalization involves changing the content of any content-facing media in order to enrich the user experience. So an example of this is where you might have an onboarding checklist for Jane, a certain one for her because she's an admin. But John, has a different role, has a totally different checklist for his onboarding. And targeting is about presenting messaging to a set of users based on who they are or what they've done. So for example, you might present a specific set of messages to people who are in the health space. So now I want to talk about the concept of initial value. So think back to a time when you signed up for a new software product. You had in your mind a preconception about what this tool would help you do, either from the marketing messages, from the homepage and what the homepage said about the product, or even from a colleague or a friend. So when you sign up for this tool, you really want to have that preconception validated. Can it really do what it promises to do? And can it do it in an effortless manner? When you get to that point, when you experience the value that relates to your preconception, that's called initial value. And because people have a really short attention span, the sooner that you can get them to that point of initial value, the better. You're nodding, Felicia. So let's look at how some of these companies define initial value. So for Asana, it means creating a new project with tasks successfully assigned to a team member. For Zoom, it's signing up, organizing, and holding the first video conference. For Expensify, it's creating that first expense report that is proof payment. And for Amplitude, it's creating the first chart. Getting to initial value requires being on point with three key factors. When a user first signs up to your product, they have curiosity. They must have enough curiosity to see them through the onboarding process to get to initial value. They come to your product with a preconception about the value that your product provides based on the marketing messages they've seen, what I discussed earlier, and they hopefully have a relevant problem that needs solving, one that your tool can help solve. You must get all three right to get to initial value and ultimately activation. If they have curiosity and a preconception, but their curiosity runs out before they get to initial value, they won't become a converted customer. If they've got a problem and the requisite amount of curiosity, but your solution fails to match the preconception of what your product does, you'll lose their trust and their business. So when you're crafting your onboarding process, you need to keep all these factors in mind. It'll help you craft the language you present to your user and keep them on track to help them get to that point of initial value. So let's talk about what it takes to go from curiosity to initial value. Your new user needs to date before they get married. They're not going to see the value of your product without going through some key steps first. And what those key steps are will differ for each product. You most likely won't know right now what those steps comprise definitively, but you'll have a hypothesis about what they are. And that set of steps to go from curiosity to initial value is called the initial value ladder. And in a B2B environment, we often have multi-user products. So you've got a number of users that will be signing up to the product in that organization. The first user of that account is called first user. And the other users are in the same account are called subsequent users or invited users. So their onboarding journeys are quite different usually. And that usually means that subsequent users don't have a setup component to their experience. One thing you should consider is that because the subsequent user often doesn't view the landing page marketing copy, you'll need to introduce them to the product and the benefits within the product and in your automation messages. And when you set up your onboarding experience, you absolutely need to tailor the experience differently between these two roles. So the path from going from sign up to trial is not always created equally. It has these two key components, curiosity and setup. In the curiosity steps, your user will be clicking around and looking to validate their preconception about what your tool does and whether it can solve their problem. They haven't yet decided to commit to setting up your tool for their needs. What you'll notice in this diagram is that different products can take different approaches to getting the user to their aha moment. If it's the kind of tool that requires a lot of setup, then in order to extend the user's curiosity period, you may need to leverage demo data to illustrate what they can achieve with the tool. So if you take the example of Amplitude, which is an analytics tool, it does a great job of this by giving you access to their music streaming demo called Amplitudes. And because the setup is non-trivial, it takes a considerable amount of time to get the volume of that data established, to create good charts. They use a demo to satisfy this curiosity factor. So a user considering whether Amplitude is right for them will have satisfied their curiosity about what is possible. But they'll still need to figure out whether they're able to use the tool easily. And that can be done with the demo data as well, but would also come after the setup phase to see if it can solve their particular problem through that. Other more simple tools don't need to take that process and can basically swing straight into setup mode. So think about which path your tool needs to take and whether you can get your users to initial value before their curiosity runs out. If your tool takes a lot of setup, then you may want to switch to populating demo data so that you can extend the curiosity runway of your users. And the last step of each of these parts is engagement, which leads to activation when the user decides to become a paying customer. So some of these concepts we go into in our customer activation workshop course. So, and that's where we practice this methodology as well when we work on customer journey optimization projects with our clients. Each of these concepts represents ways or opportunities to think about the customer journey from an individual perspective. And in order to support this concept, we have what's called a customer journey architecture that helps us to implement these concepts. This is how we think about it. Your product layer contains your core product. In order to enable scalability, we need to empower users to self-serve their sign-up, payment, and upgrade journeys. We need the right kind of back office support from a billing perspective, and we leverage a customer data platform to enable the transport of data to all the various tools needed. We have an insights layer that helps us to understand the customer's journey in the product and glean insights about what is and isn't working from a journey perspective. Ultimately, we want a 360-degree view of a customer, and we want the data available in as many tools as possible. And most importantly, we have a customer engagement layer that empowers in-product engagement, out-of-product engagement, as well as human-assisted engagement. So let's look at this guy again, the one that thinks that the next feature is going to change everything. In our experience, an incremental and experimental approach is the way companies achieve 10x growth. Establishing a growth mindset in your company is crucial to this approach. And your team needs to feel that they're supported in running experiments that may fail. If your team has a success rate of more than 55% with their experiments, they're actually being too safe. And these experiments need to tap into the emotions of your customers and elicit the kinds of emotions that will entice them to convert, buy, or upgrade. So the experimentation is iterative and incremental. It's an iterative and incremental process where each change will potentially have a small improvement on the conversion rate. So as opposed to that guy who thinks everything's going to magically change with that one feature. And in the product-led growth world, being able to experiment is key to getting your users to their aha moment. We all start out with the hypothesis of what the journey will look like. And then we basically need to experiment on that, right? So we've got a hypothesis, but it's just that. You can spend all sorts of time on UX and customer interviews, but the real data comes when people start using your product. And that is the point where the work is just beginning. So the architecture diagram I showed before is how we empower your team to run experiments without developer involvement. It's not a dirty word. I know we're in a development software house here, but in this way, your team members feel unencumbered when experimenting and iterating on their customer journeys. And that's extremely powerful, right? So because as great as developers are, if we rely on them for too much, we're actually slowing down the agility of our company. And I've never met anyone who said that their developer is sitting around wondering what to do because they don't have anything on their plate. And how many times have you guys come up with an idea that you thought was great, and the next thought you have is, I don't have developer resources to implement it? Anyone? Anyone? One. Only one? Come on, you're lying. I've lost count how many times I've had that. So in order to get to the ultimate goal of hockey stick growth, we need to get to a point where we can rapidly experiment and iterate on that customer journey. And if you could do that right now, you would, but you've got that pesky problem of development. So what we need to do is extract all the information about the customer and have it located somewhere outside of the code base. That complete view of a customer needs to be held and updated into a tool that your non-technical team members, such as your product managers and your marketers, have dominion over. We need to move business logic and content that the customer is exposed to from being embedded in code out to those other tools as well. And once we have that, changes to those things that can be made without involving your developer. When you've managed to wrestle control of these things from the developer, your productivity will start to improve. And your growth KPIs start to become disentangled from the developer back. Next up, we need to get our analytics sorted. If you don't measure it, you won't know what experiments are successful and which are failures. So when your baseline is established, the results of any experiments you create can then be measured against this baseline. And that's how we can get to rapid experimentation and iteration on the customer journey. So you may already have an experimentation process or framework. This is one that I've devised that makes sense to me. Track your customer journey during the trial and onboarding journey. Establish baseline metrics and charts, then identify friction points, hypothesize the reasons for the friction, design an experiment and then implement the experiment, view the test results of the experiment, choose the most successful version and rinse and repeat. So coming back to our customer journey architecture diagram, every one of these boxes is a source of data about your customer and their journey in your product. So ensuring that you've got the right components in here that apply to your business will enable you to create that 360-degree view of a customer and use that data in two ways: analysis and activation. So you'll be able to leverage the data collected here to do quantitative analysis, funnel charts, usage charts, and many more to identify the opportunities for improvement. And from an activation perspective, you'll be able to build the playbooks that respond to certain events in real time for each user and in a personalized way. And you'll be able to run these experiments and determine whether that has moved the needle or not. So in summary, I've gone over customer emotions, personalization, initial value, onboarding roles and paths, the customer journey architecture, and experimentation. So this content is part of a larger coaching program we have where we work together to implement the customer journey optimization approach. If you're interested in learning more, come talk to me after this or go to our website, unlockinggrowth.ca. Questions? In the back.
Hello. We had an idea of getting really involved in the experiment quickly. Absolutely on point. Like Tinder and using really great to experiment with that. You made it sound very simple to remove those the bottleneck. What are your techniques to help work around that SE problem? Because it is a problem. And every company wants to experiment with us to do that. And it'll realistically, it's small and new company. Very hard to get that 360 customer in this place. What should I buy for to increase the outside additional?
Cool. I'll repeat the question just in case you didn't hear. What are the techniques to be able to implement that 360-degree view of the customer without relying on developers? So
And the experimentation.
And the experimentation. Yes. So if you remember, we had the customer journey architecture, and it really is about leveraging those tools. We start with a customer data platform. One of these tools you might recognize called Segment. So we're Segment certified partners, and it's all about designing that event schema of what people are doing in your app and what information you want about that particular event, and putting that event schema together. And then we have to get the developers to do their bit, so we need them, so we don't need them later. And then once you've got that integration between what's happening in your app into Segment connects to all these other tools, right? And so it can and those tools know how to consume that information once they're connected to Segment. So it's really about like that one little extra bottleneck that we have of like getting the development team to implement those API calls into Segment. And then once we have that, we're able to like transport all of that data and decentralize it into all these other tools.
What metrics, so again, going back to the ski metrics, from my experience, like it's actually really exactly simple. It's like, what are the key metrics, right, that you should measure to go, so there's obvious ones like conversion rates or daily active users or revenue. What do you see as it's different, but governments in general advice that if they take away their what they should be tracked is like they get double the most important one if that's on that steam in the right direction. And obviously, I guess different experiments will require just to deal with that. But we definitely struggled early on with capturing data, and sometimes it's just too much data, and data was messy so early on. There was no volume of data to go. This is the base. We're changing the chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try and repeat it. So the question is, what are the key metrics you want to track to, obviously improve, and what was the last bit that I missed?
One is probably the metrics of how you do this is friendly direction.
Yeah.
Usually the revenue is obviously going to be obvious, one of the users is going to be obvious, but what are the things that different companies should be considering?
So what should you consider? So that's actually why we talk about things like initial value and activation. Because you start breaking out that onboarding and trial journey into some of those key milestones, then you can build a whole bunch of metrics around those milestones, right? So how many people get to conversion? It's down there. Like, let's first figure out, do they get to initial value at least? Right, so you break it out into these key milestones: initial value, activation, pay. Right, because activation and payment aren't always connected. And so if you think about those milestones, tracking whether they get there, but also how long it takes them to get to that point, because that goes back to that curiosity runway. Like, did they run out of that runway, or did they get there really quickly? And so that was good, but then like, what's happening with all these other people that are just lagging behind and just lost interest? Because essentially, if you don't get to initial value in that first session, who's coming back for a second session? Like, you're not. No one's got any attention span for that experience, right? So, yes, right.
How often should I be experimenting, and how do I know which areas to focus on?
How often should you be experimenting? Which areas to focus on? So that is where your analytics come into play, right? Because you've got your analytics baseline, and then you see, so you might put together a funnel chart. Funnel chart will say, user did this many users did this many users did this next step, this many users did this next step. Focus on the one that had the biggest drop, and focus on working on that particular step in the journey. But that's why it's really important to actually make sure you do track every step, because if you've got like, a whole bunch of missing events between this and this, you don't know what it's due to. Yes.
I was just curious about the customer journey architecture, and I'm just wondering how much emphasis or even consideration do you place on behavioral change? So when someone takes on a new product, we have this process, now we're doing something different, or potentially, whether it's disruptive or not, could be a subtle behavioral change that we've got to be paid homage to, or maybe significant behavioral change. How much consideration do you place on trying to preempt what that behavioral change might mean, whether it's B2B or B2C?
Right. So we're talking about behavioral change. Can you give me an example of behavioral change?
Oh, a very simple one I was thinking of. Previously, I used to have to print something out or to the printer on the way. So well, talk about quality, but now I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Now there's some efficiency gain with that, but it could be something as subtle as that. But operationally too, it might mean, you know, we used to follow this process, then we follow this process, it has all these other ripple effects on how we do business.
Yeah.
I know that's fairly broad and not, but I just wonder, when you insert a new product into a business, how does that play with everything else they do?
Yeah.
On an operational basis? Is that a consideration or not?
Yeah, so when you insert a new product in the business, how does that play with everything? The considerations in the ecosystem. Look, I think that some of, like, not everything can be determined from a set of analytics. Sometimes it's it requires some user research and some qualitative understanding, but that can then inform your hypothesis when you're looking at the stats in your charts to be like, well, maybe this is happening because they have to go to the printer or whatever it is, right? So yeah, you can't look at things in isolation. You're not going to get every bit of information from a quantitative analysis.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing for
Yeah.
qualitative aspect, but
Yeah.
it's still it's maybe not the most important thing, but it's consideration in everything else.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Bryson. Thanks so much for your presentation. I just have a quick question, just about the point about metrics. And if you're on early stage, you have an early stage product, or you're just getting into that space and you're trying to define what those metrics are. Am I understanding correctly with that initial value piece? That, say, for example, if it's Zoom or with Asana, Zoom, it might be trying to get into that video conference, first video conference, and or with Asana getting to the first project. It's measuring not only the how long does it take to achieve that key step, which is the video conference or creating a project, but the time it takes to actually achieve those things.
Yes.
And then, so when going off and then creating your own product or trying to do that, that's what you define your metrics around. It takes the time that it takes, as well as the key events to get that. Is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So yeah, when you've got your own product, you want to figure out like what that initial value ladder is. And Ray's nodding his head because he's been through our coaching program and he's done the onboarding canvas where it makes you define the set of steps in the order of like what initial value is. So you know what that process is, and then you can create a funnel chart to see where people are dropping off and all those kinds of things. And then yeah, you need to have some of those understandings around the timing and how long it takes, because if people are taking multiple sessions to get to initial value, then that's an opportunity to say, well, how can we change it? How can we prompt them to like get there sooner? Because they're going to forget, like they might be going to use the competitor tool after yours, and they get to initial value with them, and they're like, see you later, right? I'm not going to use your product.
Thank you.
No. Yes.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Just picking up on the link between initial value and onboarding, it's really, we're very early stages. I'd love you to just talk a little bit more about onboarding and I guess, non-negotiables, if you like, or just key principles of, what it's like onboarding process.
What are the key principles? What do you need to get right in your onboarding process? Yeah, I think so. There are some obvious ones that are kind of, there's lots of information around about that, but like things like not requiring a credit card for them to sign up. But yeah, making a really frictionless sign up process where you're not asking too much information, like make it really easy for them to sign up, and then you can get more information as you go. You can use in-product tools to actually glean more information out of them if you need to. So really just making it super efficient. And Greg sitting behind you knows all about that, and he can cut everything out of his onboarding process to make it super streamlined. So I think that's like, the sign up portion is obviously key. And then, yeah, really understanding, having a hypothesis about like where you want. I've worked with a client before and like they had all these sign-ups, but they didn't actually have an opinion about where they wanted people to go in the journey. Like, oh yeah, you can do all these things, but like if you don't know where you want your customer to go, you can't lead them down that path. And so that's where that whole initial value comes in. It's like, what is the thing that's going to make them see the value? Okay, now let me push them along that journey. Well, I think we'll wrap up questions because we've got to do the panel, right? probably running a bit late. So thanks everyone. It's fun.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Frank Casino. I've been at DiUS for 11 years, not 18. My role is time engagement principal. So I'm in the sales team, part of the sales team. My focus is purely on IT practice, but as well as that, being along the startup journey with our own, and also kind of looking after a couple of startups and helping them through the journey. So that was really useful. Thank you. We get Joe to sort of come up as well. We're from Joe, Ray, Della up as well, and Alicia. As they make their way up, we've heard from Joe and Audrey, but Ray's a delivery lead at DiUS. He's been working on product and delivery space for the past decade. Has wealth and knowledge related to markets. So doing of course. Job transformation program. Alicia is started her career traditionally in digital marketing, working across a range of different industries, including education, health, and life and professional services. She's currently senior product marketing manager at SmartFair Software, driving the go-to-market. So welcome everyone. We're also going to have some questions online. So if you've got any questions for the panel, feel free to put them up there and ask those questions. We'll start with Joe. What's been the hardest lesson you've learned in building and taking your own products?
Well, because we're primarily a tech company, of course, we have cross-functional teams around UX and product, but that first slide Audrey put up, where, the feature fallacy, the notion that if you build it, and probably more, the biggest lesson is the amount you build before you launch. I think that's kind of really the transition that product growth teaches you. Is kind of like, well, actually, if you take the lean startup kind of model, then you only really need to build one page. You don't even need to build anything else behind that. So probably just the notion, probably the biggest lesson is how much you need to launch. Because you focus on building something before you start focusing on, well, what are they going to do with it? Why do they need it? How do I get them there? How do I get them to use it? So I think, that's probably early days lessons.
Thank you. Audrey, on to you. What kind of businesses does your customer journey optimization methodology work for? And what's your biggest opportunity? What's the biggest opportunity companies have today?
The first one, many people think that customer journey optimization would only work for product-led growth / self-service companies, but we actually have like an 8-stage customer funnel, which is an expanded parametrics funnel, and it's not just about that onboarding journey, right? It's also about other stages of the funnel, and we also have a whole product-led sales approach that helps to optimize your sales processes and leveraging the data from what's happening inside your app and communicating that to your sales team if you have a sales team. So it's not just about pure product-led growth companies. And then the second question was the opportunities, right? And so like that's where we, one of the stages of our customer funnel is upsell. And it's all about getting more revenue from your existing customer base. Like, what can you do that? You don't have to pay to acquire them, right? They're already customers. So you can freely market to them and experiment on that market as well. So that's another opportunity for that experimentation to see whether you can upsell them to the next tier in their plan, or get them to, do a land and expand approach where get them to invite more users within the company that they're in, or changing the pricing structure so that you can actually optimize it and improve how much revenue you're getting from each customer.
Thank you. Ray, you're currently undertaking the customer acquisition workshop program. So what are some of the key takeaways? And as well as that, how does that sort of change your role now?
So a bit of background about myself. I'm in the delivery lead role here at DiUS, so working with a lot of the development teams and often with a lot of startup or enterprise. And I can definitely say, even with my previous role, working a lot with startups as well, it's probably one of the best courses I've been through from having actionable and direct measurements to actually take to the business itself. So I've worked a lot with, say, pirate metrics in the past, people have heard of that and that sort of thing. And it was very good at showing the general area you should be focusing on and what you can maybe do in that area. But the best thing about this course is how much actionable and direct steps I can take away from it. So you'll take your actual business through the course itself and come away with something that you can actually take and measure away from that and the steps to do itself. So it's been very, very good at being able to just have those really intricate steps and know exactly which tools to use and where and see those results and then change based on that. In terms of how to take that moving forward with my role, I think it's definitely going to be very useful for actually being able to see exactly which steps that the particular business I'm consulting for is going through, and then seeing if those steps are being used correctly, if we can iterate on that, and even being able to bring in new tools that could hopefully benefit them in that side as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Alicia, how have you applied your product and growth at Packflow, and how has it changed the way you take your products?
Good question. Audrey, thank you for your presentation. I think the content around product-led growth was fantastic. So just again, a little bit of background on me. I worked with DiUS and joined this Packflow team when they were founded by DiUS, and we were recently acquired by SmartBear, which is a global software development and testing platform. We product-led growth is something that's really important to us at Packflow. It's a way that we've found success to grow our business, and that's led us to this acquisition, which has been really exciting. I think just coming back to the importance of product-led growth and I guess positioning that within an organization as a go-to-market strategy. If we look at the way that software buying practices have changed over the last couple of decades, once upon a time it was a top-down approach where you had a C-suite make a decision and then they rolled out that software. We're now in an era of user-led adoption and users choosing tools. So everyone's probably used Zoom or Slack or Canva, any of those tools. They are tools that employ this user-led, product-led growth strategy. And that is about the user having a problem and looking for a solution to solve it for themselves. So taking that back to Packflow, Packflow is a tool that targets developers. We support them with API testing to make sure that they can deploy their software with confidence. And I guess the point being that the developers as a market, they are a group of developers are a group of people who are really opinionated about the tools that they use, and they would rather experiment with their own tools. So that comes back to some of the key principles of product-led growth, which are showing value before you ask someone to pay for your product. That can come across as a free trial or a premium product. That's something that we employ. Having your product as the growth engine for your go-to-market. So at Packflow, Matt, who was asking some questions earlier, he's the co-founder of Packflow and he's now product principal with us, and we work really closely together to determine how we create the product as our acquisition tool. We employ some strategies around marketing, those traditional sort of marketing and sales tactics, but our product is the heart of what we're selling. The other points are around building community to grow your audience as well. Again, we're thinking about our core audience being that user and solving for their problems. If you have a problem with something, you're having trouble in your day-to-day job, you'll go to your friends, you'll go to your network, or you'll go to Google. So creating solutions and creating communities to enable that. That's a couple of tactics. Oh, the other one Audrey talked about is a lot, metrics and using customer data platform, bringing all of your customer metrics usage across that entire journey from top of the funnel before they're purchasing right through to how they're using your product, and having visibility of that, because that enables you to understand that user and how they're using your product, and also to run experimentation, asking questions like, how might we change this experience for the customer? How might we unlock some growth through this particular process? No, I'm looking great. Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience? No? I might ask them. Just in regards to both Alicia and we always talk about, a lot of customers talk about having a champion within the business, like we talked about that first user, and having them to be sort of like the one that actually is, I guess, the trainer sort of scenario. How would that be part of that strategy with regards to that person and subsequently making them be a champion within the organisation that help yourself right within the business?
Yeah. No. Yeah. So that kind of plays into that land and expand, what we call a playbook, that I mentioned earlier. But I also think that we have a few of our homegrown software tools. One of them is called Unlocking Signals, and it's all about like tracking lead scoring to a particular milestone. So we actually have like, you know, initial value signal that we can track, and then activation signal, and then we have an anti-signal called the concerning signal to determine if someone is potentially like going to drop off. But I think in terms of detecting champions, I think that's another type of signal that you could build in the way that we do things. So you're tracking all the events and you're assigning a weighting to each event towards that particular signal, and that, you know, if someone is inviting more users and that kind of stuff, could have that build towards that particular signal.
There you go. I'll give an example of what we're doing at Packflow. So we generally say that our champion is the first user that signs up to our platform. Not in every single case, but generally speaking, it's going to be, let's say, a developer on the team who's really struggling. They might be getting bugs in production, and they're just really annoyed by that, and they don't feel confident when they're deploying their software. We recently did some experimentation around providing that user cohort an internal package, like a presentation deck that talked about the benefits of contract testing, which is the practice that we use through Packflow, and enabling them to share that with their team. When you think about having a SaaS product and you have that one champion, you want to enable them to be successful and them to be have the confidence and be the thought leader within their organization, the champion for adoption. And so by providing them with a tool to educate their team, that's just one of the ways that we're looking at how we can move that needle on championing champion.
So how do we establish a price point? We have a problem where we get like a 80% mix away on a price point. So see you on the homepage, I might use another page or a price over. How do you find where that is?
So I'll repeat the question. It's about pricing. What's that journey look like? But also we're finding that once they get to that pricing page, the big drop.
So we find the price point.
How do you find the pricing?
Right. One suggestion is actually something we recently touched on in the course itself. But depending too on that drop-off rate, that would also be where it might tie into the analytics around, depending on the time left in cart or possibly the amount of time when that drop-off occurs, is maybe when you possibly supply individual discounts or something similar to see what discount might get that person across the line. And you can try that at different values for different customers to see when that may occur and start giving a better indication of what that price point is where they'll actually cross the line.
I don't know that like it's the price that might be tracked, you know, is the drop off, right? Like it could just be that it might be that you actually haven't demonstrated enough value before they, you know, they might be looking around. I mean, they're just looking around, right? So it may not be the pricing. And so one of the ways to figure that out is to do some kind of user testing. There are user testing services where people go to your website and they narrate like what they're seeing, what they're thinking about your website. So that way you can get some qualitative data on that to really kind of see whether it's the pricing or it's something else.
Yeah, I second that. I think you probably need to look up the line. Are you building enough value? But then actually consider the price, and then there might be just some drop off because they're at that stage of the process. But typically, price and value are very interlinked. So if you haven't demonstrated the value, well, it kind of doesn't matter what you're charging to some degree. So yeah, the two are fairly intrinsically linked.
And then also, like, is this the right audience? Like, are the right people coming to your website? Because maybe it's that trilogy that I talked about of like, do they actually have a problem that needs something?
make one additional point just in that have a look at some of the product-led growth methodology around providing value before you ask someone to pay. That's one of the key principles we talk about. So potentially this is not product-led growth at all, just the one point, but having a free trial or offering a premium product so that your user can, let's say, sign up, experience what it is, the value that your product is providing, and then look for a purchase after that. So after they've had their activation or aha moment. But
Actually, they have a free file.
oh, fantastic.
Free, so the question, one of our question asks is that's enough value for them to start using the product. To then migrate to a actually pay for the service and you can try to find without obviously struggling with a bit of money.
Maybe you talk about the open source to paid products
Oh yeah, that's it. That's it.
transition, because that's a very similar kind of scenario for paid products.
Yeah.
Yes, developing audience.
Yeah.
Oh, I do. Oh, that's really interesting. I think with the developer audience, if you're getting to that point where you're wanting to look for payments about how do you engage the next decision maker or the influencer as well. So it might be that you're tracking your users to an aha moment where you believe now's the right time for intervention to have a conversation about upselling them to pay. Upselling to pay, yeah. The point that Joe's just made now. So Packflow is a commercial product that is built on an open source solution. So we have a lot of people that come and use that open source solution when they see the needs. For example, they might be a large organization that needs additional benefits such as security for their contract testing solution. They can't have that through the open source strictly, so they'll look at the commercial product. And so we're looking at ways that we really distinctly differentiate that free version versus that paid version.
Yeah, I think that journey really, maybe grab Matt and Alicia up
Yeah,
in some detail, but understanding who your customer is, understanding what the problem you're solving is, and understanding what the commercial value is that you add above whatever you're currently offering them in that free scenario. It's that journey to get into that. One of the good things about developers is they're very opinionated and they'll tell you exactly what they think. Now, that's not always right, but, of course, one of the advantages with Packflow and the community that Matt and the founding team were part of is that they had a very good relationship with the community, and therefore the ability to at least tease out of them what were the things that perhaps, would provide additional value in that layer, and then moving into experimentation. Okay, well, that's a great idea. We kind of agree with that. How do I test this? Who do I go to as an engineering manager, as the CTO? Who's got the biggest problem? How do we test that? So I think you've probably got a pretty good asset in that. If you've got developers using it, then you've probably got a lot of data, and you hopefully have you'll have a relationship with the developers that you'll be able to tap into. So talking to them, measuring what's going on, some of these kind of various kind of stages of the funnel and engagement and post engagement and activation. What are they doing? I think you've probably got enough data to look at it and go, okay, well, let me now spin this around. Well, kind of what about if we do this? So it's really finding that value piece above and beyond the freemium version that you've got, and that's that journey, iteration, experiment. We think it's this. Let's test it. What did we find? No, it's not quite there. Maybe it's a bit more of this, and we're just in that cycle. But it's a good start. It's an awesome start. Like, you've got people using the product, even if it's free. Well, now the challenge is to find out what they're going to pay for. But that's a better start than sitting there going, we might build, spend $1 million building something and not know whether anybody actually wants it. That's what, product-led growth and a lot of these no-code tools and, that focus on desirability early is all about. That's why we push into this space. But you're already kind of done a lot of hard work. Now it's really about optimizing and learning and testing, and that's where you're at. And then looking at what that step looks like to pay. Anyway, certainly Matt and Alicia have lived that journey for Packflow.
Lizette?
As you kind of take product into the market, perhaps you can, what are the top 2 or 3 product iterations that you take to the market? For example, you can.
So I'll repeat the question quickly. So how do you take products to market when they're in different countries, new countries?
I think that there are a number of things to consider. Firstly, you need to figure out, like, if you've got localization sorted. So do you have all the right kind of currency processing, setting up your subscription billing or your payments in the right currency in that locale? And then, yeah, obviously, like, from a localization perspective, it's also about, like, even spelling, like, do you use Z or S? Having lived in the States, I'm still a little bit in the US in terms of customer journey optimization with a Z. But so yeah, so there's that aspect. But then also, like, thinking about, like, product market fit, you have to go back to product market fit, because product and market, you've got a different market now. So is there still a match between your product and the market in that particular country?
Yeah, I think you've got to be deliberate. I think the first thing is you've got to be ready for it. So, if I take the Packflow example, we're fortunate that from an open source perspective, the community was largely in Europe and North America. It actually wasn't here in Australia. So we had an opportunity, again, just coming back to the previous conversation, to learn about what it is they actually, desire, want, need, and use. But you have to be deliberate. It's got to be a deliberate strategy. So back to product market fit, what's the path? What's the language? What are the emotions? What's the psychographics, to use a marketing terms? Well, what is it that they're actually going to be inspired by and want to buy this product, whatever it happens to be? So, specifically, it probably depends where they are. I think our experience has been that certainly in the UK, they're probably very similar buying patterns to the Australian experience. Obviously, in Germany, I think we probably found that they were very logically oriented, but that wouldn't be any surprise. But again, you play to, maybe not the generic personalities, but you do start to, think about who is my customer, how is it that they're looking at this product, what is it, what is the typical buying part in that part of the world, how do I translate what I'm doing culturally? So, I don't know, do they like free? Does free even resonate, or do they just like it? No, they're very much a premium. You've got to pay something, even if it's $1, just the notion of understanding that my customer, particularly in that part of the world or that country, connects payment with value, might be a really interesting insight. So, yeah, I think, there's probably no specific answer, but immersing yourself, understanding them, understanding the culture, and working through that early stage will teach you a lot about how to, land and then grow in that country.
And we've got a client that sells agricultural devices to farmers, or in America it's called ranchers. So they actually have rebranded their name across farm versus ranch. And then there's actually very different market in terms of how they like to buy. So some of them are like in America, they're much more digitally savvy farmers, ranchers than Australia. So the buying process is quite different. I think maybe also the marketing manager from that client is on. So
I think just one final point on that. I think the other thing that can help is if I have an ideal customer profile, targeting that ideal customer profile, even in obviously if it's a B2C, it's a little bit different. But if it's B2B, and it's typically large financial institutions, multinationals, that can help as an entry point, because you're talking a language that you already know, that they understand, and issues that they understand, because large financial institutions are largely the same, irrespective of where they live. So there can be other market entry strategies that give you a stepping stone to then consider these other things. So
I was just going to say, and as the others have mentioned, I just highly suggest always coming back to that customer-centric version and re-establishing what that customer journey is and their persona. As even just, I spent roughly 6 months or so in India, and little things you might not ever consider that is different in other countries. Like, for example, many people over there don't have a fridge, as they'll eat fresh. So that was something that I would never have considered before going there. So actually just re-looking at those customer journeys and what those personas are.
I'm gonna add two quick points. One of my points is not assuming that the industry trends and adoption of the product or solution that you're selling is going to be the same as the territory that you're taking your product to market in. there's, traditionally maybe the North American market might be faster at adopting new solutions or emerging technology than, let's say, the APAC market. So for us, we're quite aware of that, and so our marketing strategies and go-to-market strategies would reflect that. The second thing is building on that community piece. So how can you engage, have that network effect of, let's say, influencers or partners or, a go-to-market proof point when you're taking your product to market in that new territory, to add with that validation rather than just going in cold and being a new brand, have someone there be an advocate for you.
Cool, thank you. We've got a couple online. Any advice on how to build out support material that helps users and reinforces product value, tutorials, video content, etc. Thanks, Chris.
I'm gonna say, ask them what they want, ask them what they need. Like, just get really specific, put stuff out there, and just get feedback on that. That's something that we're working on all the time. With our audience being developers, we have extensive documentation, we create examples, etc. Continually iterating on that and looking at the data behind it as well. A lot often with tools like Zendesk, as an example, if you're using that as your help center for some products, you can obtain data on the search queries that people are putting into your help center data and enable that to continue to build that out. But just ask and just continue to iterate.
And I'll add from a tool perspective, there are a number of different in-product activation tools that can support that onboarding and support approach. So some of the leading ones are app queues and user pilot, and then also there's a new one that I quite like that actually goes further than a bunch of the incumbents, which is called product groups.
The only final point I make is, like, there's all the instrumentation stuff, the video support, FAQs, whatever it is, that's part of the product. Yeah, take the same approach. But, it's the same thing as, the feature scenarios, like what do you need? It's like, it's the same thing. It's part of the product. It's not a separate thing. It's not a leftover. It's part of the product. So we don't get to initial value potentially without having some kind of video or talking head or whatever the approach might be. The experience post or in the freemium might not be as great if I don't have, documentation on how to do something or what to do in this situation. So I think the lesson for us is it's part of the product. Think about it as part of the product. Whether that be the website, and it translates to all of it, right? The product is not just the software. The product is the entire experience. That's the message today, right? And so think about all the things that we talked about in this space, applying to the entire product, not just the software bit that we've had a bunch of devs doing before. Not, we're taking some of these no-code tools. So yeah, but think about the entire product in that way. Think about the cycle where you're at. Think about the things that you need to do. If it's about an issue value, or it's less about subscription management and multi-currency, and probably more about getting the first user so that I can actually build them and work out what currency they need. So yeah, but that's probably the big lesson to think about as part of it.
We take one more, two more. Yep.
I guess getting a couple of constraints around that fit and understanding who you're actually targeting. I've had experience working in a company where we've been kind of struggling to work on up to eventually realize that it was the market you were targeting the wrong user, and that was like skewing all our data. So do you have any strategies or advice on at that really early stage actually validating who you're targeting at before you have an experiments with them? Skewed by that being right.
So I'll repeat the question. So how do you validate, I guess, product market fit and customers? For your product.
You're the early
Look, I think the thing is that experimentation is pretty key. So at the end of the day, coming back to the things we've heard today around hypothesis, what is it that I want to do? What is it that this business, this platform, this product does? Who's my audience? Investing in understanding that audience, investing in testing the value proposition, determining, kind of whether that works or not. Do I get them through the funnel? The reality is you're probably going to have to look at, the customer and look at perhaps the different roles that people might play and what their triggers might be, and so if we're talking about large financial institutions, multinationals, yeah, we've got devs who are sitting there promoting this thing up, but they don't have access to the credit card. So who do I need to convince that's going to actually, how do I get them to push it up? And if it's the engineering manager or the tester or the CTO, or in this case, it's all around quality. So, we had the issue of, testing and the quality regime within a development organization are the ones who actually get all problems, but it actually is a transformation of the development activity and getting the developers on board with the approach. So you kind of need to know the landscape and the customer set, and then you need to work on, roles, the kind of things that we look at is, there's individuals, there's roles, there's organizations, there's geographies, there's different levels that you can look to experiment within to find where that fit is. And it might not be here, as we found with Packflow, for example, where, potentially it's because we're laggards in Australia or Asia Pac, but, because our ideal customer profile in a large way was, large multinational, financially oriented, regulated organizations. The bigger ones are not here. The bigger ones are overseas. So we had to work through that. But anyway, I think that the notion is that finding the buyer and the path to purchase is all that, is everything that Audrey and the team have spoken about. That's experimentation in itself. It's not just, oh, well, now that I know you, how do I get you paid? It's like, well, who is it? Who does it resonate with? What is the thing that's going to get them initial value, kind of light bulb moment to go, yeah, I need this thing. I'm prepared to pay anything to get it.
It's like we were discussing earlier, like one of the trickiest things is if you have certain customers that think their market is everyone. So they want to target the entire market. And often that's the worst thing you can do, is obviously you just spread yourself too thin and don't know who your evangelists are. So often another good way there is with the experimentation. It doesn't just target the product, but also the marketing itself. So actually doing different types of marketing targeted different specialist groups just to see what responses you get from those.
Right?
But just on that, like with our coaching program, we're actually in that stage right now, trying to figure out who our ideal customer profile is. So you guys are all part of this experiment, by the way. But we were at the Careers Expo a few weeks ago, trying to figure out if individuals were, and now we're testing out organizations, right? So like we're actually doing that experimentation right now.
It's really a focus on learning. I think this is what this is all about. It's like, yeah, we talk about a process and metrics and numbers and whatever. It's a journey to learn, and so you need to do things that that you're learning about, right? And it might be the thing that you thought isn't where it lands, right? So from a careers and education perspective, it might actually be organizations, and maybe it's not even the HR manager who's the person who's going to purchase. If you want to get to scale, you need to find it. Getting one person on a training course is great, but that's not going to pay the bills. You need to find a path to that, and then you need to find a path to scale. So the very stages and different techniques and approaches, but it's all about learning continuously.
I've got two other questions online. If there's any questions in the room, maybe catch up after the panel, because at least we're here. They're not, but I'll go with the first one. I feel that many of the things we've discussed are focused on onboarding and initial part of the journey. Do you have any advice on keeping the curiosity and the engagement over time, and what would to Nicholas?
I might kick off. I think we're talking about product-led growth and continually making your product something that your customers or your users are curious about. So that comes back to how you're devising new features and how you're releasing that to your users to keep them engaged. One thing that we're working on with Packflow is we've always had this is really open roadmap around these are the new features that are coming. So it's kind of like giving that taster to our audience to keep them hooked in. If it's, let's say, something that our enterprise customers are really looking towards, we might be having a conversation with them about, hey, procurement, etc. They might be buying into our purchase, not because of the features that we have right now, but because they can see the roadmap and they that curiosity of what we're going to continue to build out in the future. It's one tactic we play.
And we have I've talked about our customer funnel, which is that 8 stages. So one of those stages is retain. And so it's all focused on, how do you keep them engaged, and really like, how do you get them to renew like an annual license? How do you get to the renew next year? And so we have some, what we call playbooks around that. And in fact, we're about to release some specific product offerings in our consulting space around like churn retention, churn reduction, essentially. So yeah, there are ways to do that that involve really kind of nurturing that key decision maker well in advance of that annual renewal date.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what kind of Audrey said earlier in the presentation as well, is it's understanding that you've got types of users, probably depending on your life cycle, whether you whether your focus is attracting them or, but yeah, there's no doubt that you need to continue to look at not just retaining them, but turning them into advocates, you know, because that's how you get scale and growth. So the focus, you know, really needs to be around servicing them separately to servicing first time and new users, but working out not only how to continue to deliver value to them, but how do I get them to advocating for this product and this platform, because that'll give you, you know, product-led growth is about the product selling itself. It's about the people who use it selling it for you. It's not about having boots on the ground and salespeople kind of going in there and making millions of phone calls. So you need to turn them into advocates. That's the path, you know, whatever the flywheel looks like. You just got to define the nurture path and kind of get them to that point.
I'm just going to jump in, sorry, one more example because I have tactical stuff. I think another way to keep your customers engaged is if you're employing a customer data platform, so you're getting visibility of how your customers are using your product. Why not think about ways how you can serve that back to them in a valuable way, so providing them insights. I'm a customer of Upbank. I don't know if anyone else is. Super big fan of them. I think they're fantastic. I get notifications from my app to tell me about my spending in relation to the budgets, how I'm bringing my savings, etc. And so they're using the data that they're collecting, that they're looking at from how I'm using their product, but it's serving that back to me in an insightful way. This can be done on a B2B scale as well. We're looking at how we're going to do that with Packflow too, through our product, how we serve that to our customers through an email or in-app notifications, then bringing that back to the product to get deeper insights through a product usage dashboard.
The other thing, just the final point is that like existing customers are gold, because not only do they might help you, you know, advocate for you, but actually they'll give you insight into how to sell the new ones, right? So it's like, oh, yeah, these guys got all this value. That's why people write case studies, testimonials. Like, what are you trying to achieve with that? It's not just somebody saying this is great. It's actually, I want to find someone like that. How do I use that information about what this person or this company or whatever it is, what value they're getting out of my product to generate a hand, you know, more of it. And that's kind of that path to ICP, the ideal customer profile. Right? I've got this individual, they, you know, they like this, they shape like this, they use it in this way. How do I find more of it? Can I find more? Do they care? Or is it just this individual? You know, is this, so looking within actually can help you attract more. So whilst we talk about different paths, different agendas and whatever for existing users, really you can bring it back to the top of the funnel.
As a final point to add on to that as well. Final. Yeah. Just don't be afraid to ask your customers as well, even if it's for that long term, especially if they've been with you for a long time. They're usually more than keen and happy to give advice there. So I know a lot of people that for some reason are afraid to talk to their customers, but don't be afraid to just reach out and ask what would they like next.
If you're going to ask them to, you know, give you input on features you're building, why don't you ask them about the future features and see if you know people have it. So yeah, nice one. All right, last one we'll sort of finish on. Had a question about the Unlocking Growth course. When does it kick off? How long is it? And is it available to attend?
Glad you asked.
Yeah, excellent. I'm getting my experiments working. Yeah, so our next cohort kicks off in October. It's a 14-week program, and it's a combination of video content. You get access to a whole suite of tools that so you can get hands-on, and we have and then you have a 1 hour live session each week. Right, in the middle of it.
Exactly. So yeah, lots of content to do during the week, and then yeah, those calls are incredibly valuable to actually go through the course content, answer any questions or blockers you might have, and also just to work with the other members in the course as well. So the other thing I might mention, which is very useful, is upon finishing the course, you'll also have that alumni that you can connect with and continue networking with there as well.
Yeah, we have a Slack community that people stay in. So.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for your questions. For those that are here, feel free after this to network and have a chat with the team. Those online, thank you. But we just want to thank Joe, Ray, Alicia, and Audrey
Thanks very much. Thanks, Brett. And again, thanks everybody. Obviously, thanks for the panel. Just, like hoping that everyone got at least one thing out of today. And I think, if you're a product leader or a founder or in charge of a business, I think, there's a quest to succeed, right? And so if you learn one thing, hopefully that's one thing you can take back and apply. If you learn more, then even better. But I think the quest to develop and learn is really important. So hopefully we shared some stuff today that we can take away. Obviously, thanks to the panel. We're going to do the ticket thing. Oh, awesome. Okay. So just before we wrap up, and we'll let Audrey kind of grab the prize, but we have a prize which has been up for grabs, and I think everybody's kind of registered, or at least most people have, for SASTA, which is a conference basically held over in San Francisco. 3-day event. Obviously, as the name says, it's all about SaaS platforms and the ecosystem around that, including investors and any number of SaaS kind of companies, networking sessions, a whole lot. So really great opportunity, I guess, to kind of be on a global stage, obviously in San Francisco, for anybody who is part of the SaaS platform journey. So maybe,
And Unlocking Growth has a booth there, so come and visit us if you happen to be there already.
and the winner is, we're going to drum roll.
Lucky 13, F13. Yeah.
All right, so well, thanks everyone again. I think we're done. Obviously, there's plenty of time to sit back. The panel's going to be here, and they'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Thanks to everyone online, and thank you for everybody for making time today. And what is a fairly busy schedule. Thanks everyone.